The thing that frightened Coordinator Velsha first was not the human ship. It was that the ship had stopped transmitting its name. Every vessel that crossed into conquered space announced itself. This was not law, it was instinct. The way breathing was instinct. The way a creature that wished to live made itself known to the things that could end it. 40,000 years of civilization had taught the galaxy that anonymity was the posture of the dead. And so when the small gray vessel slid past the outer beacon and went silent, Velsha's first assumption was malfunction. Her second was cowardice. Her third, which she did not record in any log because it embarrassed her, was that the humans simply did not know the custom. They were new, after all, barely 3 centuries into the wider dark. The conquered had watched them the way one watches an insect cross a vast floor, with mild interest and no investment. When humanity had requested a seat at the periphery talks, the assembly had laughed, not cruelly but the way adults laugh at a child who announces it will be king. And when the humans had been told by the terms of the audience that they would send a single representative vessel into the heart of conquered territory as a gesture of trust, the assembly laughed again. One ship, unarmed by treaty, into the gravity well of 1,000 worlds. It was meant to humiliate them, a test designed to be failed. No serious species would send one ship into the maw of a civilization that could unmake it. They would send a fleet, or send nothing, or send apologies. The humans had sent one ship, and the laughter had rolled across 40 systems, and somewhere in the comfortable dark the great powers had already moved on to more important things. Velsha had not moved on. She was a junior coordinator assigned to monitor the approach, a post so beneath notice that it had been given to her precisely because nothing was expected to happen. She sat in a quiet station above a quiet world and watched a quiet ship come closer, and she felt, for reasons she could not articulate, the small cold sensation of a thing being slightly wrong. The ship was not decelerating. That was the second wrongness, and it arrived before she had finished being unsettled by the first. Protocol for entering an inhabited system was to shed velocity at the heliopause, to come in slow and visible and harmless, to let the watchers watch. The human vessel was not slowing. It was not accelerating either, which would at least have been an aggression she understood. It was simply holding its speed with a steadiness that no fearful thing could hold, crossing the threshold of conquered space at exactly the velocity it had carried for the entire journey, as though the border meant nothing, as though the 1,000 worlds beyond it were not there. She queried the vessel. She used the formal channel, the one that demanded response by treaty. The reply came back in under a second, which was itself strange, because the humans should not have had her frequency mapped that quickly. It was a single line of text, rendered in the conquered trade tongue with no errors, and it said, "We are aware of the terms. We accept them, that was all." Velsha read it 4 times. There was nothing threatening in it. There was nothing in it at all, no name, no rank, no greeting, no plea. And yet she found that her hearts had begun to beat out of rhythm, and she did not understand why, and she would spend a great deal of the coming days trying to understand why, and she would never fully succeed. She forwarded the exchange to her superiors with a note recommending caution. The note was read by a clerk, summarized by a second clerk, and entered into a queue behind 900 matters of greater importance. By the time anyone of rank saw it, the human ship was already 11 hours into conquered space and had still not slowed, and had still not spoken again, and had still not done anything that any law could name as wrong. This is the part the galaxy would later struggle to explain. Not what the humans did, what the humans didn't do, because for the first 6 days the single ship committed no act of aggression whatsoever. It did not deploy weapons it was forbidden to carry. It did not broadcast threats. It did not deviate from the corridor it had been assigned. It came in along the exact path the conquered had dictated, obedient to the letter of every term, and somehow this obedience was more frightening than any violation could have been, and no one could say why, and the not knowing spread outward from Velsha's small station like a crack moving through ice. On the second day she was given a name to attach to the ship. The humans had, when pressed by a higher authority than hers, finally provided a manifest. The vessel was called the Threnody. Its crew complement was listed as 1. A single ship into the heart of a civilization that could erase the human species in an afternoon, and aboard it a single living being. Velsha brought this to her supervisor, a tired old administrator named Koros who had survived 40 years of politics by never being surprised by anything, and Koros looked at the number and said, "It's a stunt. They sent one person to seem brave. There's no risk in bravery you can't be punished for." "They can be punished for it," Velsha said. "We could destroy them at any moment." "Then why aren't you comforted?" Koros asked, and she had no answer, and he dismissed her, and she went back to her station and watched the ship and felt the cold thing in her chest grow a centimeter larger. The human was a woman. The Conquered knew this because, on the third day, she opened a visual channel without being asked. She did not say anything. She simply appeared on the monitoring feeds, sitting in a small, dim cabin, looking directly into the receiver as though she could see Velsha through it, which she could not. She was older than Velsha had expected. Humans aged visibly, a fact the Conquered found morbid, with gray threaded through dark hair, and a face that had the particular stillness of someone who had already grieved everything they were going to grieve. She looked at the camera for a long moment. Then she reached forward and adjusted something off frame, and the feed showed not just her face but the cabin behind her, and in the cabin behind her, fixed to the wall, were photographs. Hundreds of them. Small rectangular images of human faces, children and elders and people in the middle of their lives, arranged in careful rows that covered every surface. Velsha did not understand what she was looking at. The Conquered did not memorialize the dead with images. It found the practice ghoulish, a refusal to let go. But she understood, looking at the woman's still face surrounded by all those small faces, that she was being shown something deliberately, that this was a message, and she could not read it. She sent the feed up the chain with a single question: "Why is she showing us this?" No one answered because no one knew, and the not knowing was now 4 days old and had begun to attract the attention of people who did not like not knowing things. The woman's name, when it finally came, was Captain Ada Reyes. She provided it on the 4th day in response to a formal demand, along with one additional piece of information that the demand had not requested and that no one had thought to ask for. After her name and rank, she had appended a single sentence, and the sentence was this: "I am not the negotiator. I am the message." This was when the first of the great powers began to pay attention. The Sarn were old, older than the Conquered itself in a sense, having been one of its founding pillars before the others had even reached their stars. They were patient and precise, and they did not frighten, and when the transcript of Captain Reyes' words reached the Sarn delegation, an envoy named Thun Kersh read it and felt something he had not felt in 800 years, which was the specific discomfort of an equation that would not balance. I am the message, not the messenger. The message, a living being declaring herself to be the content of a communication rather than its carrier. Thun Kersh turned the sentence over in his mind and found that it had teeth. Because a message could be destroyed without consequence, that was the point of messages, that they were copies, that the loss of one did not matter. But this woman had said she was the message, which meant that destroying her was not the destruction of a copy. It was the delivery of a reply, and he did not know to what. He requested the full file on the human approach. He read Velsha's early note, the one about the ship not slowing, and he flagged it. And for the first time in the entire affair, someone of real power asked the question that the junior coordinator had been asking for 4 days. What are they actually doing? The answer, when the Sarn analysts assembled it, was both simpler and worse than anyone had assumed. The Threnody was on a course that, if maintained, would carry it past the Conquered's administrative homeworld at a distance of 40,000 kilometers. Close by the standards of these things, but not threatening. The ship had no weapons capable of reaching the planet. It had no apparent purpose in passing so near except symbolism, a small ship saying, "I came all the way to your door." The analysts noted this and almost dismissed it. And then one of them, a young Sarn with a habit of distrusting clean answers, ran the trajectory not as a fixed line but as a probability cone, accounting for the ship's mass and velocity and the gravity wells it would cross, and found something that made him sit very still for a long time. The Threnody was not aimed at the homeworld. It was aimed at the homeworld star. Not directly. The course bent around it, a graceful curve that any observer would read as a slingshot maneuver, a fuel-saving turn of the kind every species used. But the young analyst, distrusting clean answers, asked what would happen if the curve were not a slingshot. What would happen if, at the closest point of approach, the Threnody did not turn? And the model told him that a ship of that mass, at that velocity, on that path, would not strike the star in any way the star would notice. The star was vast. A single ship was nothing. The star would not notice. But the star was not the target either. Between Threnody's closest approach and the homeworld lay the lattice, the great orbital structure that the conquered had built across 10,000 years, the spine of its civilization, the relay network through which every transmission, every fleet order, every coordinating signal of 40 systems flowed. It was the nervous system of an empire. It was also, by ancient and unquestioned design, entirely undefended because nothing in 40,000 years had ever been mad enough to attack the thing that everyone depended on. To strike the lattice was to strike the air that everyone breathed. No species would do it because every species needed it. It was beyond protection because it was beyond threat. The young analyst ran the numbers a fourth time. A ship of that mass, at that velocity, if it did not turn. He took his findings to Thun Kersh, and Thun Kersh looked at them and said the thing that would later be quoted in every history of the period, the thing that marked the exact moment the laughter stopped. They are not going to attack us. They are going to make us choose. Because here was the trap, and it was beautiful and it was monstrous. The Threnody could be destroyed at any moment. It was one ship. But to destroy it required a decision, and the Conquered's defenses were oriented outward, toward the borders, toward fleets and invasions. The single ship was already past the border. It was inside, and the only weapons positioned to reach it in time were the lattice's own maintenance drones, the small workhorses that tended the great structure. To stop the Threnody, the Conquered would have to turn the lattice's tools against a target moving directly through the lattice's most delicate channels. And if they missed, if a single drone misfired, if the human ship made one unpredictable move at the wrong instant, they would do to themselves what they were trying to prevent the humans from doing. The humans had not brought a weapon. They had brought a position. They had walked into the one place in the galaxy where the Conquered could not act without risking the thing it most needed to protect. And they had done it with a single unarmed ship and one woman who called herself a message, and the Conquered, with all its fleets and all its 40,000 years, found that its power had become a liability, because power that cannot be used without self-destruction is not power at all. Thun Kersh requested a direct channel to Captain Reyes. It was granted. He was old and he was patient and he had not been frightened in 8 centuries, and when the woman's still face appeared before him surrounded by her wall of small dead faces, he asked her, with the directness the Sarn were known for, what she wanted. "Nothing," Ada Reyes said. "I want nothing. That's the part you can't price." And Thun Kersh, who had negotiated the surrender of 3 civilizations and the founding terms of 2 others, who had spent 800 years learning that everything that lived could be moved if you found the right lever, Thun Kersh felt the cold thing that Velsha had felt on the first day, and understood for the first time that it was not fear of the ship. It was fear of a being that could not be bargained with because it had already decided to lose everything. He severed the channel and convened the powers. The mistake they made next was the kind only the very wise are capable of, the mistake of a mind so accustomed to solving problems that it cannot conceive of a problem with no solution. They reasoned thus. The human had said she was the message and wanted nothing, but every living thing wants something, and the thing she wanted, clearly, was for humanity to be taken seriously. She wanted respect, status, a seat. The threat to the lattice was leverage to obtain it. And leverage of that kind could be diffused by simply granting the demand before it was made. Give the humans their seat. Give them the recognition. Remove the reason for the threat, and the threat dissolves, and the dangerous woman turns her ship away and goes home a hero, and the conquered loses nothing but a little dignity. It was elegant. It was generous. It was completely wrong, and the wrongness of it would take 3 more days to surface, and in those 3 days the dread accumulated in everyone who understood the situation like water rising in a sealed room. They sent Ada raise the offer, a full seat at the assembly, recognition of humanity as a sovereign power, trade rights, protection guarantees, everything a young species could dream of, granted in full immediately with no conditions. More than humanity had asked for. More than humanity had ever been given to any species at first contact. It was the largest concession in the recorded history of the conquered, and it was extended to a single woman in a single ship because the alternative was a choice no one wanted to make. Ada Reyes read the offer. The feed showed her reading it, her still face unchanged, her eyes moving across the text. And then she did something that broke Thune Kersh's 8 centuries of composure. She declined. Not angrily. Not with demands for more. She simply sent back 2 words, "Thank you," and held her course, and the Threnody continued toward the closest approach, and the conquered realized, with a horror that spread system to system faster than any fleet could travel, that they had misunderstood everything. The woman had not come for a seat. The threat had not been leverage. There was no demand to satisfy because there had never been a demand. They had offered her the galaxy and she had said thank you, and kept flying toward the moment when she would have to choose whether to turn, and her refusal of everything they could give meant that the one thing they had assumed about her, that she could be satisfied, was false. This was the rehook, the moment the entire story turned inside out, because now everyone who had been watching had to go back and reread every prior moment in a new and terrible light. The silence at the border had not been ignorance of custom. The refusal to slow had not been bravado. The wall of dead faces had not been mourning. It had all been preparation. The humans had known from the beginning exactly what they were doing, and they had let the galaxy laugh because the laughter was part of it, because being underestimated was the weapon, because a civilization that thinks you are an insect does not defend against you until the insect is already inside the wall. And now the question that had haunted Velsha since the first day finally sharpened into its true form, and it was not what are they doing, it was why is she willing to die for it? Because that was the only thing the offer had proven. A being who refuses the galaxy is a being who has already accepted death, and no one knew why. Velsha, still at her small station, still watching, requested permission to speak with the human directly. The request should have been denied. She was junior, she was nothing. The matter had ascended far beyond her. But the powers were paralyzed and grasping at anything, and someone in the chaos approved it almost by accident, and so it was Velsha, the first to be frightened, the first to ask the right question, who opened a private channel to Ada Reyes on the 6th day, with the closest approach now less than 40 hours away. "I don't understand you," Velsha said. It was not what she had planned to say. It came out of her before she could shape it into something more dignified. Ada Reyes looked at her through the feed, and for the first time her stillness cracked just slightly into something that might have been kindness. "No," she said. "You don't, that's why I'm still alive. If you understood me, you'd have known you couldn't stop me and you'd have destroyed me at the border before I got inside." "Tell me then," Velsha said. "Make me understand, if you do this, if you don't turn, the lattice dies. 40 systems go dark. Trillions of beings lose everything that holds them together. Why, what did we do to you?" And Ada Reyes was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Nothing. You did nothing to us. That's the part you'll never forgive yourselves for." She would not explain it. She severed the channel, and the not knowing reached its unbearable peak, and the conquered, in its desperation, finally did the thing it should have done on the first day. It looked, truly looked, at the small world humanity had crawled out of, and at the 3 centuries of human history it had dismissed as beneath notice. It read the records it had never bothered to read. And in those records it found the thing that explained everything, and the explanation was worse than any threat, because it was not about the conquered at all. 11 years earlier, a conquered survey expedition, routine, automated, beneath notice, had passed near a human colony on the outer edge of their settled space. The colony was small, 40,000 people. It was not on any map the Conquered cared about. The survey expedition, following standard protocol for clearing debris from a transit lane, had redirected a stellar fragment, a piece of dead rock the size of a mountain, onto a trajectory that would carry it harmlessly into empty space. The calculation had been performed by a maintenance intelligence. The calculation had been wrong by a fraction of a degree. No one had checked it because no one checked routine debris clearance because nothing important was ever near a transit lane. The fragment had struck the colony 4 years later. There had been no warning because the Conquered did not monitor human space, because human space was beneath notice. 40,000 people, children and elders and people in the middle of their lives. Gone in an afternoon, by an error no one had made on purpose, in a place no one had bothered to look. Humanity had traced the trajectory. It had taken them years, working with instruments the Conquered would have called primitive, but they had traced the rock back to its redirection and found the survey log, which the Conquered had not even bothered to encrypt, because who would read it? And they had learned that their 40,000 dead were not the victims of malice or war or even indifference, but of something worse than all of those, of not mattering enough to be noticed at all. They had not been killed. They had been cleared like debris by a civilization that did not know they existed and would not have cared if it had. This was the wall of faces. This was the message. Ada Reyes had lost her daughter on that colony. The small images covering her cabin were the 40,000 dead, every one of them, carried into the heart of the Conquered, by a woman who had decided that the galaxy would learn their names or learn what humans do when their names are not learned. The Conquered understood now why she could not be bought. You cannot offer a seat to grief. You cannot trade status to a woman who has already buried everything she would have wanted status for. The offer of the galaxy had been an insult so profound that she had answered it with thank you, because there was nothing else to say to people who thought a chair could pay for a child. And the Conquered understood, too, the true shape of the trap, which was not the lattice at all. The lattice was the mechanism. The trap was moral, because now the choice before them was not do we let them destroy the lattice. The choice was do we, who killed 40,000 people by treating them as nothing, now kill one more person to protect our convenience, and in doing so, prove that her entire accusation was correct. If they destroyed the Threnody, they would be doing to Ada Reyes exactly what they had done to her colony, erasing an inconvenient human to keep the machinery running. She had not built a weapon. She had built a mirror, and she was flying it toward their face at a velocity from which they could not look away. Thune Kersh, who was old and patient and had not wept in 800 years, read the survey log and the colony records and the count of the dead, and he understood that there was no decision that did not damn them. To act was to confirm the crime. To not act was to lose the lattice. The humans had not given them a problem to solve. They had given them a confession to make. He went, in the end, not to the powers but back to the channel, to the woman. The closest approach was 12 hours away. Threnody had not deviated by a single degree. "We found the log," he said. "We found the colony. We know what we did." "I know you found it," Ada Reyes said. "I left it for you. I made it easy. I wanted you to read it in your own time, not because I told you, because then you'd believe it." Her still face was very tired now. "We didn't come to make you pay. You can't pay. There's no number. We came so that the next time your machines clear debris from a transit lane, someone checks the math. We came so that we exist to you. That's all. That was always all. And the lattice was the only way to make you look," she said. "You wouldn't look at 40,000 dead colonists. You looked at a threat to your relay network in under a day. I learned that from you. I learned exactly what you value and I aimed at it because that's the only language you answer." She paused. "I'm not going to destroy it." The relief that moved through Thune Kersh was so vast that it took him a moment to register the rest of her sentence, the part that came after, delivered in the same flat, exhausted voice. "I was never going to destroy it. I don't have the velocity to do real damage, and you know that now, because your young analyst will have run the numbers a fifth time by now and found that the Threnody would mostly just disintegrate. I couldn't have killed your lattice. I could only have made you murder me to be sure. That was the whole weapon, not the ship, me. A human you'd have to kill on camera with 40,000 faces watching to protect your convenience. Something almost like a smile crossed her face, and it was the worst thing Velsha, listening on the open channel, had ever seen. And I'd have let you. I'd have flown straight through every drone you fired, because then it wouldn't be 40,001 humans you'd erase to keep your machines running. It would be 40,001 humans you'd erased while we all watched you do it. And you would never have been able to call us insects again, because you'd have known, every one of you forever, exactly what we were willing to become to be seen. The channel held in silence. 12 hours from the closest approach, a single unarmed ship and one woman who had built a bomb out of her own death and then announced at the last moment that she had never intended to detonate it because the threat had done its work the instant they understood it was real. "You'll turn then," Thunkersh said. "I'll turn," Ada Reyes said. "I'll fly home. You'll have your lattice and your 40 systems and your 40,000 years. And every one of you will carry for the rest of your lives the knowledge of what you almost did and the knowledge that you only didn't do it because a single human was willing to die to make you choose. You'll remember us now. That's the seat I came for. Not a chair at your table, a place in your nightmares. That one you can't take back." She turned the ship. The maneuver was visible from 40 systems. The Threnody curved away from its collision course in a long, graceful arc, exactly the slingshot the analysts had first mistaken it for, and began the slow journey back toward the border, back toward human space, back toward home. And across the Concord, trillions of beings who had spent 6 days in a fear they could not name exhaled at once, and the fear should have ended there, and for most of them it did. But Velsha, still at her small station, still watching, did not exhale. Because she had been the first to be frightened and the first to ask the right question, and she was now the first to notice the last wrongness, the one that no one else was looking for because everyone else was too relieved to look. The Threnody was turning, but it was turning slowly, too slowly. And Velsha, who had watched the ship for 6 days and learned the shape of its every motion, ran the new trajectory and found that the slow turn would carry Ada Reyes home. But it would also carry her on the way, directly past the survey beacon that had logged the debris clearance order 11 years before. The dead instrument that had done the killing, still there, still broadcasting its routine telemetry into the empty dark, having never once registered that anything it did had mattered. And Velsha understood, in the cold, certain way she had understood nothing on the first day, that Ada Reyes was not going home to be a hero. She was going home the long way, past the machine that had killed her daughter, so that she could look at it. So that the last thing she did inside conquered space was pass the thing that had cleared her child like debris and let it see, on its instruments that recorded everything and understood nothing, a single human ship going by. Velsha opened the private channel one last time. She did not know what she would say. She found Ada Reyes already looking into the feed as though she had been waiting. "I see your course," Velsha said. "I see where you're going." "I know you do," Ada Reyes said. "You were the first one who looked. I read your border note. The whole way in, I knew there was one of you who was already afraid. I wanted to thank you for that, for being afraid of us before you had a reason. It means you'll remember the reason now." "Why the beacon?" Velsha asked. "It's just a machine. It can't understand what it did. It can't be sorry. There's nothing there for you." And Ada Reyes was quiet for a long time, the longest silence of all the silences, and behind her the wall of 40,000 small faces watched them both. "Because it's the last place she existed to anyone but us," she said finally. "The last thing that touched her was that machine's mistake. I'm not going there for it to understand. I'm going there so that I'm the thing that touches the place last. Not your error, me, her mother." Her still face did not change, but something moved behind her eyes that had no name in any language the conquered knew. "You asked me on the first day why I'd die for this. I'll tell you now because I'm leaving and it can't be used against me. I wouldn't die for revenge. I wouldn't die for a seat. I'd die so that the universe contained one fact it didn't contain before, that she was loved enough that someone crossed the whole galaxy to be the last to stand where she fell. That's not strength. Your people kept calling it strength, and it is. It's just love that refused to be reasonable. That's the whole thing you don't understand about us. We're not strong. We just don't stop. Long after it makes any sense, long after every one of you would have grieved and moved on and let the machines keep running, we don't stop. She reached forward to close the channel and then paused and looked at Velsha one last time. Check the math, she said. Next time your machines clear debris, whatever else you forget, check the math. There's always someone underneath it. The channel closed. The Threnody completed its long, slow turn and passed the survey beacon at a distance of 900 kilometers, and the beacon, understanding nothing, logged the passage as routine traffic and continued broadcasting its telemetry into the dark. And then the single ship crossed the border it had entered in silence 6 days before and went home, and was never seen in conquered space again. Velsha was promoted within the year. The first thing she did with her new authority was order a full audit of every automated clearance protocol in 40 systems, and the audit found 900,000 calculations that had never been checked by any living mind, and 41 of them were wrong, and 3 of those 41 would have killed someone, someday, in a place no one had bothered to look. She fixed them. She fixed all of them. She spent the rest of her life fixing them, and she never told anyone why she cared so much about debris except once near the end, when a junior coordinator asked her what had frightened her about the human ship on the very first day. It didn't transmit its name, Velsha said. Every ship transmits its name. It's instinct. It's how a thing that wants to live makes itself known to the things that could end it. She was very old by then and very tired, and she looked at the young coordinator with eyes that had checked 900,000 calculations. I thought they were too primitive to know the custom. I had it backwards. They didn't transmit their name because they weren't afraid of being ended. They came in silent because they'd already decided that the only thing worth dying for was making us learn it. And we did. I still know it. I'll know it until I die. She did not say the name aloud. But every survey log in 40 systems carried it now, in a line of code Velsha had written into the clearance protocol herself, a line that did nothing functional, that the machines simply read and ignored on their way to checking the math. A single human name, attached to nothing, explaining nothing, a thing the galaxy would carry forever without fully understanding why. The galaxy had laughed at humanity for sending a single ship. It never laughed again, not because the ship had been powerful. It had been the weakest thing ever to cross the border, one unarmed vessel and one grieving woman and a wall of the dead. It never laughed again because it had learned the thing that Ada Rays had crossed the galaxy to teach it, the thing that no fleet could have taught and no weapon could have proven, the thing that every rational civilization in 40,000 years had been too sensible to ever discover about itself, that the most dangerous being in the universe is not the one with the most power. It is the one who has already decided what they are willing to lose, and finds that the answer is everything and keeps flying anyway, long after every reasonable thing would have turned away, straight toward the place where someone they loved became, to everyone but them, nothing at all.